I need to read the transcript file to understand the story details, then write the new story. Now I have everything I need. Let me write the new story. There was a moment, standing in the middle of that polished showroom floor, when I realized I was the only person in the entire room who wasn't looking at the car. Everyone else was. The 3 consultants in their pressed shirts. The 2 appraisers who had flown in from Toronto. The estate lawyer with his reading glasses and his clipboard. Every single one of them was looking at that 1971 Jaguar E-Type, sitting there under the track lighting, like something carved out of midnight, absolutely silent, absolutely beautiful, and absolutely, completely dead. I was looking at the woman standing off by the windows. Her name was Catherine Ellard. She was 53 years old and one of the most powerful real estate developers in British Columbia. She had built half a city, practically. Her name was on hospital wings and university bursaries, and the kind of charitable foundations that get mentioned in the Globe and Mail. She could have written a check that afternoon that would have made most people's heads swim, and she was standing by those floor-to-ceiling windows in a charcoal blazer, with her arms folded tight across herself, looking at that car the way you look at something you are terrified of losing all over again. Like it might disappear if she stopped watching it. I want to tell you the whole thing, because there is something at the heart of this story that I have been trying to find the right words for ever since it happened, and I think I am finally ready. My name is Miles Donahue. I am 41 years old. I am a single father to a 9-year-old boy named Owen, who has strong opinions about hockey cards and weak opinions about bedtimes. I run a small automotive restoration shop in the Okanagan Valley, in a town that most people drive through on their way somewhere bigger. The shop was my father's before it was mine, and it was my Uncle Terry's before that, and before that it belonged to a man named Earl Donahue, who came back from overseas with shaky hands and a mechanical mind and a desperate need to do something quiet and useful with both of them. I am not a wealthy man. I am a comfortable man on a good month when nobody's furnace goes and Owen doesn't need new skates. I drive a 2009 pickup that has opinions about cold mornings, and I pack my lunch, and I know all my neighbors by their first names, and I have never once in my life owned anything that could be described as a luxury item. I tell you all of this so you understand clearly what I was doing in that room. Her father's name was George Ellard. I had known George for 19 years. He was not a billionaire. He had been a contractor, a small businessman, the kind of steady, competent, unhurried man who had built modest things with great care over the course of a long and decent life. He had done well enough, not spectacularly, comfortably. He had a house in Kelowna with a good-sized garage, which was the important part, and he had a 1971 Jaguar E-Type that he had bought as a project car when he was 44, and Catherine was just starting secondary school, and he had spent the better part of the following decade restoring it down to the last wire and washer, largely by himself, in that garage, on weekends, with the radio on. I had helped him over the years, not with the full restoration, which he was too proud and too stubborn for anyone else to touch, but with the finicky ongoing work that old British cars demand the way difficult people demand attention. Continuously and without apology, George would call the shop on a Tuesday and say, in that measured way of his, "Miles, she's being contrary again." And I would say, "When isn't she, George?" And we would both understand exactly what needed to happen next. He was not the kind of man who talked a great deal, but he was the kind of man who showed up, reliably, with coffee from the Tim Hortons on the main road, 2 large, double-double for me and whatever he was having, and he would lean against whatever wall was closest and watch me work, and we would talk, unhurried, the way men talk when neither of them has anything to prove to the other. I knew his hands. Broad, square, contractor's hands, with old scars that he never bothered to explain. I knew that he was quietly proud of his daughter, and noisily reluctant to say so directly, the way fathers of a certain generation tend to be. I knew that he kept a photo of Catherine at about age 7 tucked inside the driver's side sun visor of the Jaguar, up there with the old registration papers, where nobody would find it unless they knew to look. He had never told me it was there. I had found it myself one afternoon and said nothing, and neither had he, and that was that. I knew that when George was happy, genuinely happy, loose-shouldered and easy, he drummed his fingers, not on a table, on the bonnet of the car, a particular rhythm, unhurried, 2 fingers, like a man keeping time to a song only he could hear. I had seen him do it 100 times without him knowing I was watching. It was the kind of thing you notice about a person when you have known them long enough. George died 14 months ago. His heart, on a Wednesday afternoon in March, in his own garage, standing next to the Jaguar. The paramedics told Catherine afterward that it would have been very fast. She had told me that part quietly, once, as though she were still deciding whether it was a mercy or not. I went to the service. I wore the jacket I keep for occasions, and I sat near the back because I knew my place. And I grieved quietly for a man who had shown me what patience looked like, which is a thing not everyone gets shown clearly. And then, about 7 months after George passed, Catherine called my shop. I hadn't spoken to her in years, directly. She and I had overlapped at the shop a handful of times over the years when she came to collect her father after a long morning, and we had been pleasant with each other in the way that people are pleasant in doorways. But I didn't know her, not really. I knew of her in the way that anyone in a small to medium city knows of a person who builds things with their name on them. She was composed on the phone, deliberate. She explained that the estate had been settled and that she had, as her father had wished, kept the Jaguar, that she intended to keep it properly, and that she had tried to start it just recently, for the first time since he died, and the car was not starting. Had me bring it in, she said. Her people came and collected it on a flatbed, professional, efficient, exactly the way she ran everything, from what I understood. And then she had also brought in the consultants. I don't think she had planned to, originally. But there is something about a problem that doesn't yield, that makes people with resources reach for more resources. 3 weeks. 2 appraisers with factory Jaguar certification, and a third man who apparently consulted for a classic car museum in Vancouver. All of them had looked at the car, run their diagnostics, tested their systems, and all of them had delivered the same impossible, maddening verdict. There is nothing mechanically wrong with this car, and yet it would not start. When Catherine called me the second time, I could hear it in her voice. Not panic. She was not a woman who panicked. But underneath the composure there was something strained and thin, the way old wood sounds just before it splits along the grain. She said she was prepared to pay whatever it cost. She named a number. It was a significant number. She said she didn't care about the money, only about getting the car running. I told her I would come and have a look. I almost didn't, if I am being fully honest with you. My own father had died 8 months before George. Pancreatic cancer, quick and cruel and entirely without mercy. He had been gone by November, and I was still carrying that around with me in the particular way that you carry grief that hasn't finished with you yet. In the chest, behind the sternum, right where you breathe. I was not in the mood for a puzzle, but I had known George for 19 years. So I drove out. The showroom-style space was attached to the back of Catherine's property in West Kelowna, a building that was more glass than wall, with proper climate control and track lighting, and a sealed epoxy floor the color of a frozen lake. The kind of space that said, very quietly, "This is how we take care of the things we love." The Jaguar sat in the middle of it looking extraordinary, even motionless, even surrounded by the paper wreckage of 3 weeks of failed expert analysis. It was a genuinely beautiful machine. Series 2, the long bonnet roadster, in British racing green that had gone almost black in certain lights with the patina of decades. George had done the restoration with obsessive fidelity. Every chrome piece original or correctly matched, the leather interior in a deep, dark tan that he had sourced himself from a supplier in England after months of correspondence. He had loved it the way a person loves something they made with their own hands, which is to say without quite being able to explain why to anyone who hadn't done the same thing. The consultants were still there, 2 of them, standing near a folding table covered with printouts. They looked at me when I walked in, and I recognized the look, the careful, politely concealed assessment that skilled specialists give to someone they consider unlikely to be useful. It was not hostile. It was simply automatic. I was wearing work trousers and a shop jacket, and I had engine grease under my left thumbnail that I had not managed to fully shift. I didn't look at the car. I walked across the floor to Catherine Ellard, and I said, "I'm sorry I couldn't make the service. I should have found a way." She looked at me for a moment, and something shifted very slightly behind her eyes. "He would have told you not to close the shop for it," she said. And then, quietly, He talked about you sometimes. He said you were the only mechanic he had ever met who could hear what a car was trying to say. I had not known that. It sat in me a moment, warm and heavy at once, the way some things do. Then I asked her the question. "Catherine," I said, "when the hospital returned your father's personal effects, the things that were in his pockets that afternoon, was there a key fob? Not a car key, a separate piece, older, small, flat, black plastic, Jaguar leaper on the front, probably chipped along one corner. He would have carried it separately from his key ring. In his jacket breast pocket, most likely. Left side." She went very still. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has just said something that shouldn't be possible for them to know. "There was something like that," she said slowly. "Small, black. I put it in the box with his watch and his wallet. I didn't know what it was. I assumed it was some old thing that didn't belong to anything. I need that," I said. "I don't want the money. I want that fob." One of the consultants made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Something adjacent to it. "That's a transponder key fob," I said to Catherine, only to her, as though the others weren't there. "That specific car, that year, that restoration, your father had an aftermarket immobilizer fitted. A good one. Clifford system, he told me about it years ago. Proud of it. He fitted it himself. It requires that fob to be within about a meter of the ignition before the car will start. Without it present, the car will crank and turn over and sound completely healthy and never catch. Every single time. Silence. The keys in the estate set," I said, "were the cut metal ignition key and the valet fob he kept on the main ring. The valet fob can lock and unlock the doors. It cannot disarm the immobilizer. Nobody would know that unless they knew about the Clifford system, and he never had it documented anywhere that I could find, because that was your father. He didn't trust paperwork the way he trusted his own two hands." Catherine Ellard stood very still for a long moment. Then she said, almost to herself, "He put it in his breast pocket so he wouldn't lose it with the car at the shop." "Yes," I said. "He always carried it there." She sent someone for the box. "I want to tell you what happened while we waited, because this is the part I keep coming back to." One of the consultants, to his credit, came over and said, quite genuinely, "Is that right? An aftermarket Clifford immobilizer?" And we talked through the technical details, the two of us. And he nodded and had the good grace to look slightly awed and not remotely defensive about it. He was a good man. He simply hadn't known George. Catherine stood near the windows the whole time, looking out, her arms still folded around herself. I stood near the car. Not looking at it particularly, just present with it, the way you are present with something that belonged to someone you are missing. The fob came in a small manila envelope, sealed with tape, the way the hospital packages personal effects. Catherine handed it to me herself. Her hands were steady. She was steady. She was the kind of woman who holds herself together through an act of ongoing will, and I respected her for it. The fob was exactly as I remembered it. Flat, black, a Jaguar leaper worn nearly smooth on the raised surface. One corner chipped. It was warm in my hand, though that was only the envelope. I held it for a moment longer than I needed to. I had never held it before. I had only ever seen George fish it out of his breast pocket and set it on the workbench before he handed me the car keys. Every single time. For years and years, the gesture so automatic he never mentioned it. Holding it was its own thing. A small, complete, private kind of grief. Like finding a handwriting sample. Then I walked to the Jaguar and I opened the driver's door and I lowered myself in. The leather was cool. The interior smelled of conditioning oil and faintly, underneath that, of something older. Something that was probably just old car and old leather but felt, in that moment, like something else. I placed the fob on the console beside the shift lever, within range of the receiver tucked beneath the dash. I put the ignition key in. I looked at nothing in particular for a brief second. I turned the key. The Jaguar started on the first try. I want to tell you what that engine sounds like, because you deserve to know. A Series 2 Jaguar E-Type inline 6 restored correctly is not a loud car. It is not aggressive or operatic or showy. What it is deeply, resonantly, contentedly alive. It settles into an idle like a large cat settling into a chair. Patient, present, sure of itself, it does not roar. It purrs but with weight behind it, with 30 years of careful love in every frequency. It filled that glass room from floor to ceiling and wall to wall with a sound that had been absent for 14 months. Catherine made a sound that I will carry with me until I don't carry anything anymore. Both hands came up to her mouth. Her shoulders came in. Her whole body sort of turned inward toward the sound, the way a person turns toward warmth. She did not weep publicly or dramatically. That was not who she was. But her eyes were wet, and her hands stayed over her mouth, and she stood completely still, and she listened, and she was not in that room at all. She was in a garage in Kelowna with the radio on, and her father's hands doing what her father's hands had always done. I let it run. I did not rev it. I let it idle, warm and steady and alive, and I kept my own hands in my lap, and I did not touch the radio, or adjust anything, or do anything at all except let the car speak. After a minute and a half or so, I reached forward and turned it off. The silence that came down after was not the dead silence that had been living in that room for 14 months. It was different. It was the silence of a room that had just remembered something and was holding on to it carefully. Nobody spoke for a little while. One of the consultants, the young one, had taken a step back toward the wall. The older one was looking at the floor in a way that didn't suggest embarrassment, but something more like recognition. Catherine eventually lowered her hands. She looked at me through the windscreen. I got out of the car. She asked me why I hadn't wanted the money. We ended up sitting on the front steps outside the glass building, because somehow neither of us wanted to stay in the room with all the other people just then. It was early evening. The Okanagan light was doing what it does in September, going long and golden over the lake, the kind of light that makes everything look like something you are remembering. I told her about my father. 8 months gone, pancreatic, quick, merciless. I told her about the week after the funeral when I had gone to his house to start sorting his tools, because someone had to, and I had stood in his workshop and found myself completely unable to do anything except stand still and listen. For what? I could not have said clearly. For the sound of him moving around in the next room, for the particular creak of the old workshop stool when he shifted his weight, for his voice saying my name, one syllable, blunt and fond, the way he always said it. For anything, really, for proof. I told Catherine that I would have given the shop, the truck, everything I owned, for 30 seconds of ordinary sound from a man who would never make any again. And I told her that I understood, standing in front of that Jaguar, what she was actually asking for. Not a running car, a sound, the specific sound of something her father had loved, alive and present, and filling a room the way he used to fill a room. You do not charge a daughter for that, I told her. You don't invoice grief. You don't hand a person their father's voice and then pass them a bill. I wanted the fob because I had watched George set it on my workbench for 19 years, and it was the most him of anything in that building, more him than the car, more him than the certificates in the velvet binder. It was worn from his pocket and warm from his jacket, and it had been with him right until the end. She was quiet for a while after I said all of that. Then she said, "He would have liked that you thought of him first." I told her I thought she already knew that. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. She did not push money on me. She had heard enough by then to know that wasn't what the afternoon had been about. But she was also not the kind of person who let a thing like this go unmarked, and I came to understand that later. What she did was refer every car she owned to my shop. 7 cars, all of them needing something. And she told 3 people she knew, friends of the family with serious collections. And one of those people told 2 more. And inside of 4 months, I had more work than I could do alone, and had to hire my first full-time employee. A young guy named Porter, who turned out to be a natural with British cars and didn't talk too much, which is rarer than you'd think. She also, and this is the part I think about on the nights when Owen is asleep and the house is quiet, and I am still awake, she also called the local community foundation on my behalf and put her name to a legacy bursary for Owen. Not a check written directly to me, a proper educational trust, the kind that can't be turned down out of pride, the kind that just sits there waiting for a 9-year-old boy to grow up and need it. She did it quietly. She told me about it in an email, 2 sentences, no ceremony. I read it standing in the shop, and I had to put my phone down and go stand outside for a few minutes. Owen doesn't know about it yet. He's 9. He cares about the Canucks, and whether his best friend Curtis can sleep over on Friday, and whether his Halloween costume is going to be as good as he is imagining it. He has time. But someday he is going to understand that a man his grandfather's age, a man who said almost nothing out loud that he was proud of, but showed it in every careful thing he did, left a shape in the world that protected people he never even got to meet. I keep the fob on my own keyring now, right next to my shop key and the key to my father's old house, which I still haven't managed to sell and probably won't. The three of them together on a worn split ring make a particular sound when I pull them out of my pocket, a soft click and jingle, quiet and specific. And it is mine now. That sound, the same way the third stair was mine and the sound of my dad's workshop stool was mine. I think about George when my thumb finds the chip in the corner of the fob. I think about his hands on the bonnet of the car, that slow, patient two-finger rhythm, keeping time to a song only he heard. I think about my own dad, and the sound of his voice saying my name. And I think about Owen out in the truck on Saturday mornings, working through whatever book he has on the go, waiting for me without complaining, the way good kids do, the way kids do when they trust you to come back. One night after everything had settled, I picked him up from my sister's place where he'd been staying for the day, and on the drive home he asked me about the Jaguar. He had heard me mention it on the phone a few weeks before, and had filed it away the way he files everything. "Dad," he said from the back seat, "did you fix the old car?" I told him I had. Was it hard? I thought about it, about Catherine's face, about the sound of that engine filling the glass room, about a small black fob sitting on a workbench for 19 years, patient and unremarkable, holding the only thing that made the whole machine make sense. "No," I said. "It wasn't hard at all. I just remembered somebody." He went back to his book. He is 9 years old and he did not understand what I meant by that. That is completely fine. That is exactly right. He will understand it someday. On a day I pray is a very long time from now, in a room that has gone quiet in the wrong way, listening for something ordinary that will not come, he will understand every word of it. And when that day comes, he'll have the shop if he wants it, and he'll have the fob, and he'll know that his father once sat on a set of concrete steps in September light and understood, fully and without question, that the most valuable thing, in a room full of expensive machines, was a small, worn, overlooked piece of black plastic that fit in one man's breast pocket and held all the love in the world. A building full of certified specialists walked in and saw a classic car with a fault they couldn't diagnose, and one ordinary mechanic walked in and saw a friend. And that right there was the only difference there ever was, between a problem that couldn't be solved and a solution that took about 4 minutes. The smallest things hold all the love. They always have. They always will. What is the sound, the particular ordinary sound, of someone you have lost, that you would give almost anything to hear one more time? Tell me about it in the comments. Say their name if you want to. I read everyone.